The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my parents' estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was the kind of November rain that makes everything gray. The Long Island Sound in the distance, the manicured lawns, even the faces of my family members gathered around the mahogany dining table. "We're doing this because we love you, Daniel," my mother said, her perfectly manicured hands folded on the table. She wore her pearl necklace, the one she only brought out for important occasions. Behind her, my father stood with his arms crossed, his jaw set in that familiar expression of disappointment I'd seen my entire life. I looked around the table. My older brother, Marcus, sat to my left, his Brooks Brothers suit immaculate as always. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister, Claire, picked at her designer nails, sighing dramatically. And there, at the head of the table where he had no right to be, sat Uncle Richard, my father's brother, the family attorney, and apparently the architect of whatever this ambush was about. "An intervention?" I said, my voice hollow. "For what?" "For your situation," Uncle Richard said, sliding a manila folder across the polished wood. "Your company, Reynolds Tech Solutions. We've all discussed it, Daniel, and we believe it's time to cut your losses." I stared at the folder, but didn't touch it. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Connecticut coastline. The smell of my mother's expensive perfume mixed with the scent of freshly brewed coffee that no one was drinking. "My company is doing fine," I said quietly. Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Fine? Danny, you're hemorrhaging money. You've mortgaged everything. Your apartment, your car, your reputation." "My reputation?" I felt heat rising in my chest. "I've built something real. We're 6 months from launching." "6 months from disaster," my father cut in. His voice was steel. "I didn't raise a son to be a failure, Daniel. I raised you to be practical, to be smart. This tech fantasy of yours has gone on long enough." Claire finally looked up. "We're worried about you," she said, though her tone suggested she was more worried about her own comfort. "What happens when this all falls apart? When you come crawling back asking us to bail you out?" "I've never asked you for a dime," I said, my hands clenching under the table. "Not yet," Uncle Richard interjected smoothly. He opened the folder, revealing documents I recognized immediately. Loan papers, business filings, partnership agreements. "But that's exactly where this is heading. Your company has 3 lawsuits pending, Daniel. Your credit is maxed out. Your business partner, Mr. Okafor, has already started distancing himself." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about Kwame?" "We know everything," my father said. "We've had someone looking into your affairs for the past 2 months. Someone who cares about this family's legacy." The room felt smaller suddenly. The rain against the windows sounded like static. I thought about Kwame Okafor, my best friend from MIT, the brilliant engineer who'd believed in my vision when no one else would. We'd spent 4 years of developing our software, a revolutionary cloud security system that every major tech analyst said would change the industry. "This is insane," I whispered. "What's insane," Marcus said, leaning forward, "is watching you destroy yourself. Mom and Dad have a solution, a way out that protects everyone." Uncle Richard slid another document toward me. "A voluntary bankruptcy filing, Chapter 7. We dissolve Reynolds Tech Solutions, liquidate the assets, and you walk away. Clean slate. You can come back to the family business, work for Marcus at the investment firm." "Work for Marcus?" I couldn't help the laugh that escaped. "You mean be his assistant? Fetch his coffee while he takes credit for other people's work?" "Watch yourself," my father warned. But I was past watching myself. 4 years of 18-hour days, of believing in something bigger than my family's real estate empire and hedge fund profits, of actually trying to build something that mattered. And they wanted me to just... "I'm not signing anything," I said, standing up. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor. My mother's face hardened. "Daniel, sit down. We're not finished." "I am." I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "You don't get to decide my life, any of you." "If you walk out that door," my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "you're on your own, completely.
No family support, no connections, no safety net. I looked at him, at the man who'd taught me to swim in the Sound, who'd never once told me he was proud of me, who'd always made it clear that success meant following his path and his path alone. "I've been on my own since the day I told you I wasn't going to Harvard Business School," I said. "This is nothing new." I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. Behind me I heard Claire's whispered, "He'll be back. He always comes back." But I wouldn't. Not this time. The rain had turned to sleet when I reached my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that my family pretended not to see whenever I visited. As I drove away from the estate, away from the stone pillars and the security gate, away from the weight of everything the Reynolds name was supposed to mean, my phone buzzed. It was Kwame. "Emergency. Need to talk now." I pulled over on the side of the post road, water streaming down my windshield, and called him back. "They got to him," Kwame said before I could even say hello. His Nigerian accent was thicker than usual, the way it got when he was stressed. "Your uncle, he contacted Mr. Patterson." "James Patterson? Our primary investor, the man who'd believed in us enough to put in $3 million? What did he say?" "That we're a liability, that you're unstable, that the company is a fraud." Kwame's voice cracked. "Danny, he's pulling out. All of it. And he's threatening to sue for misrepresentation." The world tilted. Outside, a truck roared past, spraying sleet against my car. Inside, I felt everything I'd built start to crumble. "I can't do this," I said. "They can't just—"
They already did. I got served papers an hour ago. Your family is forcing us into involuntary bankruptcy. They filed on behalf of some creditors they claim we owe money to. Daniel, I've never even heard of these companies. I closed my eyes. Of course. Uncle Richard, the attorney. He'd probably set up shell companies, created false debts, manufactured a crisis that didn't exist. "Where do we stand?" I asked. "Court date is set for January 15th. Federal Bankruptcy Court in Manhattan. We have 60 days to prepare. But Danny, they're really good at this. The lawyers they hired, the documentation they fabricated, it looks real. It looks like we've been running a scam this whole time." "We haven't," I said firmly. "Our software works. Our clients are real. Everything we've built is legitimate." "I know that. You know that. But can we prove it in court? Against your family's resources?" I didn't have an answer. I sat there in my car on the side of the post road, sleet turning to snow, the lights of Greenwich fading behind me, and felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. "We fight," I finally said. "We don't let them win. We go to court, we present the truth, and we save our company." Kwame was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know I'm with you, brother. All the way, whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," I repeated. But as I drove back to my tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, past the glittering skyline of Manhattan, past the neighborhoods where people like my family never set foot, I wondered if the truth would be enough. I wondered if anything would be enough against the weight of the Reynolds family legacy. I had 60 days to find out. The law offices of Morrison, Grant & Associates occupied 3 floors of a midtown Manhattan skyscraper. Their reception area had marble floors, leather furniture, and a receptionist who looked at my off-the-rack suit like I'd tracked mud on her pristine carpets. "Daniel Reynolds," I told her. "I have a 10 o'clock with Harold Morrison." She clicked her manicured nails against her keyboard without looking at me. "Mr. Morrison is running 15 minutes behind. Have a seat." I sat and waited and watched as other clients, men in Armani suits, women carrying Hermes bags, were immediately escorted to private conference rooms. The message was clear. I didn't belong here. But I couldn't afford not to be here. Morrison was one of the top bankruptcy attorneys in New York, and he'd agreed to review my case pro bono after a former MIT professor had called in a favor. It was my only shot at understanding what I was up against. 45 minutes later, a young associate finally led me to a small conference room.
Harold Morrison arrived 10 minutes after that, a man in his 60s with white hair, tired eyes, and the kind of expensive watch that cost more than my annual rent. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but perfunctory. "I've reviewed the filing your family submitted. Let's be direct. You're in serious trouble." He opened a laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was the involuntary bankruptcy petition. 23 pages of legal language that boiled down to one thing. My family was claiming Reynolds Tech Solutions owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to various creditors and was using fraudulent means to avoid payment. "These creditors," I said, pointing to the list, "I've never heard of any of them. Titan Consulting Group, Northeast Business Solutions, they don't exist." "They do exist," Morrison said, pulling up corporate filings. "Registered in Delaware, properly documented, with legitimate paper trails showing they provided services to your company. But we never hired them. We never—" "I believe you." Morrison closed the laptop. "But believing you and proving it in court are two different things. Your uncle is a skilled attorney. He's created a web of documentation that looks absolutely real. Shell companies, forged contracts, fake invoices, all of it designed to look legitimate under scrutiny." The conference room suddenly felt too hot. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched out in all directions, millions of people living their lives completely unaware that mine was falling apart. "There has to be something we can do," I said. "There is. You can settle. Agree to dissolve the company, distribute the assets, and walk away. Your family has indicated they're willing to drop the fraud claims if you cooperate." "And if I don't?" Morrison looked at me for a long moment. "Then you go to court. You try to prove these debts are fabricated, and you probably lose. These cases, Mr. Reynolds, families destroying families over money, they rarely end well for the person without resources."
I thought about Kwame, working late into the night to perfect our software. I thought about the small team we'd assembled, brilliant people who'd taken pay cuts to join us because they believed in the vision. I thought about the contracts we were so close to signing, the future we'd built together. "I'm not settling," I said. Morrison sighed. "Then we prepare for war. And I need to be honest with you, this kind of war costs money. Money you don't have." 3 weeks before Christmas, I sat in Kwame's apartment in Harlem, surrounded by boxes of documents. His wife, Amara, brought us coffee and sandwiches, her eyes worried, but her smile encouraging. "You'll figure it out," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "I've seen you two solve impossible problems before." But this felt different from any problem we'd solved at MIT. This wasn't code or algorithms. This was my own blood trying to erase everything I'd built. "We need to trace the money," Kwame said, his laptop balanced on his knees. "If your uncle created fake companies, there has to be a trail. Money flowing in circles, payments that don't make sense." I pulled up our company's financial records for the 100th time. Every transaction was legitimate. Payments to real vendors, salaries to real employees, investments in real infrastructure. Nothing that suggested fraud or debt to any of these mysterious creditors. "The problem is proving a negative," I said. "How do you prove something didn't happen?" My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom had to take medication because of the stress you're causing. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Is this really worth destroying the family?" I put the phone face down on the table. "Your brother?" Kwame asked. "Playing the guilt card, as usual." "You know what I don't understand?" Kwame leaned back, his eyes on the ceiling. "Why? Why do this? You're their son. Your company isn't taking anything from them. We're not competing with their businesses. Why work so hard to destroy what you've built?" I'd ask myself the same question 1,000 times. "Control," I finally said. "My father can't control me as long as I'm independent. As long as I have something that's mine, that I built without him, he can't dictate my life. This isn't about money.
It's about making sure I fall in line.
That's sick. That's family. I took a sip of cold coffee. At least, that's my family. We worked until 3 in the morning, building a timeline, documenting every legitimate transaction, creating a counter-narrative to my family's fraud claims. But the more we worked, the more I understood Morrison's pessimism. The legal system wasn't designed for truth. It was designed for evidence. And my family had manufactured evidence, while I only had honesty. On December 23rd, I got the call I'd been dreading. Daniel, it's Patterson. James Patterson, our investor. The man whose $3 million had kept us afloat for the past 2 years. Mr. Patterson, I can explain. I'm sure you can, but I'm calling to inform you that I'm exercising my rights under our investment agreement. Given the bankruptcy proceedings and the fraud allegations, I'm demanding immediate return of my investment plus damages. My hand tightened on the phone. We don't have $3 million in liquid assets. You know that. It's all been invested in development, infrastructure. Then you'll need to liquidate or face another lawsuit. I'm sorry, Daniel, but I have a fiduciary duty to my own investors. I can't be associated with a company accused of fraud. We're not frauds. These allegations are fabricated by my family. I've seen the documentation. It looks very real. And whether it's real or not, the damage to reputation is the same. I need to protect myself. He hung up. I stood in my apartment, if you could call a 400-square-foot studio in a building with no elevator and apartment, and felt the walls closing in. Without Patterson's support, we had no funding. Without funding, we couldn't complete our software. Without the software, we couldn't prove our company was legitimate. My family had engineered the perfect trap. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone in my apartment, eating Chinese takeout and reviewing legal documents. My phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers, reporters wanting comments on the bankruptcy scandal, former business contacts suddenly remembering they were too busy to talk, and one message from my sister Claire. You could end all of this tomorrow. Just sign the papers. Come home. Why are you being so stubborn?
Because some things matter more than comfort, I wanted to tell her. Because building something real matters more than preserving the family image. Because I'd rather lose everything fighting for truth than win by accepting their lies. But I didn't respond. I just kept working. The New York Times business section ran the story on January 2nd. Tech startup faces bankruptcy amid fraud allegations. Family members file involuntary petition. They'd found a photo from my college graduation, me standing between my parents, smiling like I'd just won the lottery. The caption read, Daniel Reynolds, 29, whose family real estate empire is valued at over $500 million, now faces legal action from those same family members over his failing tech venture. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Reporters, former colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly interested in my spectacular failure. I turned it off and went for a run along the East River, watching the sun rise over Queens, trying to outrun the feeling that I was drowning. When I got back to my apartment, there was someone waiting in the lobby. Marcus. He stood near the mailboxes, looking deeply uncomfortable in his cashmere coat. This building didn't have doormen or marble floors. This building had flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of someone's morning bacon mixed with industrial cleaner. What do you want? I asked, not stopping as I headed for the stairs. To talk. 5 minutes. I don't have 5 minutes for you. He followed me anyway, up 3 flights of stairs, his expensive shoes echoing on the worn concrete. When I reached my door, he was breathing hard but still determined. I'm not going away, Danny. I unlocked the door but didn't invite him in. Say what you came to say. Marcus looked past me into my apartment,
at the futon that served as both couch and bed, at the mini fridge that held my entire kitchen's worth of food. "This is how you're living?" he said quietly.
"This is how I'm building something real. What do you want, Marcus?" He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "Dad sent me. He wanted me to give you this. It's a check for $50,000 and a job offer. Assistant VP at the firm. Salary, benefits, the works. All you have to do is sign the dissolution papers for your company." I stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "He also wanted me to tell you," Marcus continued, his voice lower now, "that if you don't take this offer, things are going to get much worse. Uncle Richard has documentation ready to submit to the SEC, claiming you committed securities fraud with Patterson's investment. Whether it's true or not, the investigation alone would destroy any chance of you ever working in tech again." "Of course he does." I felt a laugh building in my chest, dark and bitter. Because when manipulation doesn't work, my family moves straight to threats. "It's not a threat, Danny. It's reality. You can't win this. You're outgunned, outspent, and out of options. Why are you doing this to yourself?" "Why are you doing this?" I shot back. "Why are you here, delivering Dad's bribes? You're my brother, Marcus. Or did they buy you out too?" Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. "You think I enjoy this? Watching you suffer? But someone has to be practical. Someone has to think about the family." "I am thinking about family. I'm thinking about who my family should be. People who support each other, who believe in each other, not people who use legal warfare to force compliance." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You always were the idealistic one. Even when we were kids, you had to do everything the hard way, the righteous way." He held out the envelope. "This is your last chance, Danny. Take it." I didn't take it. After a long moment, Marcus set it on the floor outside my door. "The court date is in 2 weeks. When you lose, and you will lose, don't come crying to us. You made your choice." He left, his footsteps echoing down the stairwell. I stood in my doorway for a long time, looking at that envelope. $50,000. A job. A way out of the nightmare. All I had to do was admit defeat. I picked up the envelope, walked into my apartment, and dropped it in the trash.
The next week was a blur of preparation. Kwame and I worked 16-hour days, building our case, documenting everything. We hired a lawyer, not someone from a prestigious firm like Morrison, but a recently graduated attorney named Sarah Chen, who worked out of a shared office space in Flushing and charged rates we could almost afford. Sarah was young, maybe 26, but she was sharp and hungry, and most importantly, she believed us. "This is definitely manufactured," she said, reviewing the creditor claims for the first time. "Look at the timing. All these invoices are dated within a 3-week period last year, but they supposedly span 6 months of work. Nobody bills like that." "Can you prove it's manufactured?" I asked. "Maybe, if we can get access to your uncle's communications, but they'll claim attorney-client privilege, and breaking through that is—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Difficult," Kwame finished. "Nearly impossible without a smoking gun." We needed a miracle. We needed something that would blow the case wide open, something undeniable. We needed luck. We didn't get it. On January 10th, 5 days before the hearing, I got an email from our biggest potential client, a Fortune 500 company that had been in final negotiations for a major contract. "Mr. Reynolds, given the recent legal issues surrounding Reynolds Tech Solutions, we've decided to pursue other vendors. We wish you the best in resolving your situation. Regards, Jennifer Whitmore, CTO, Stratton Industries." $3 million contract. Gone. Just like that. That night, sitting in my apartment with the lights off, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline,
I let myself consider the possibility that I was going to lose, that my family would win, that everything I had built would be destroyed, and I'd walk away with nothing but debt and a cautionary tale about hubris. My phone rang. Amara, Kwame's wife. "Daniel, you need to come to the hospital. It's Kwame." The world stopped.
What happened? He collapsed at the office. They think it's his heart. We're at Mount Sinai. Please come. I ran, down 3 flights of stairs, into the street, flagging a taxi that took forever to fight through Manhattan traffic. When I finally reached the hospital, Amara was in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "He's stable," she said before I could ask, "but the doctor says it was a stress-induced cardiac event. His blood pressure was through the roof. Daniel, they want to keep him for observation, but he's insisting on being released in time for the hearing." "He's not going to the hearing," I said immediately. "His health is more important." "You try telling him that." She wiped her eyes. "He keeps saying he won't let you face them alone." They let me see him 20 minutes later. Kwame lay in a hospital bed hooked up to monitors, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. When he saw me, he tried to sit up. "Don't," I said, moving to his bedside. "Don't even think about it. The hearing. Forget the hearing. You're staying here until you're better." "Daniel, you can't do this alone." "I'm not doing it alone. I have Sarah, and I have the truth." Kwame grabbed my hand, his grip weak but desperate. "Promise me something. If this goes badly, if they win, you'll walk away. No more fighting, no more suffering. You'll take their offer and move on." I couldn't promise that, so I just held his hand and changed the subject. But driving back to Brooklyn that night, I realized something. I'd been so focused on winning, on beating my family, on proving I was right, that I'd forgotten what really mattered. Kwame was in the hospital because of stress I helped create. Our small team was facing unemployment. Our investors were abandoning us. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I was being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. Maybe it was time to let go.
January 15th dawned cold and clear. I stood outside the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse in downtown Manhattan, watching my breath fog in the winter air. The building was imposing, all limestone and glass, with columns that made it look like a temple of justice, theoretically. Today, I'd find out if justice was real or just another word for whoever can afford better lawyers. Sarah Chen arrived carrying 3 bags full of documents. She looked nervous, which didn't inspire confidence. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No." "You?" "Not even a little bit." She tried to smile. "But we've got truth on our side. That has to count for something." Inside, we went through security and made our way to courtroom 5 on the 3rd floor. The hallway was crowded with lawyers, defendants, creditors, all the human drama of financial collapse playing out in whispered conversations and stressed faces. Then, I saw them. My family. They stood at the far end of the hallway like a portrait of American success. My father in a charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000. My mother in pearls and a dress from some designer I couldn't name. Marcus looking like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes. Claire checking her phone with manicured nails. And Uncle Richard at the center, directing everything like a conductor leading an orchestra. They didn't see me at first. Then Claire glanced up, saw me, and whispered something to Marcus. One by one, they all turned to look. My father's expression was ice. My mother's was disappointment. Marcus looked away quickly, like he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Only Uncle Richard smiled, a small, satisfied smile that said he'd already won. "Mr. Reynolds," Sarah touched my arm. "We should get inside." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected from TV shows and movies. Wood paneling, a judge's bench that sat higher than everything else, tables for the petitioners and respondents, and a gallery of seats where spectators could watch the proceedings. My family took seats in the front row. I sat at the respondents' table with Sarah. Between us and them, an aisle that might as well have been an ocean. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Thornton."
Everyone stood. The judge entered, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a presence that immediately commanded respect. She took her seat, and we all sat. Case number 25-CV-10743, the bailiff announced, in the matter of the involuntary bankruptcy petition against Reynolds Tech Solutions, LLC. Judge Thornton looked down at the papers before her, then up at both tables. Counsel for the petitioners? A man stood from my family's table, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that screamed top-tier law firm. Gregory Walsh, Your Honor, from Walsh, Sterling, and Rhodes, representing the creditors in this matter. Counsel for the respondent? Sarah stood, and I could feel her nervousness. Sarah Chen, Your Honor, representing Reynolds Tech Solutions. Judge Thornton made a note, then looked directly at me. Mr. Reynolds, you understand the nature of these proceedings. Your creditors are claiming you're unable to pay your debts and are seeking involuntary bankruptcy. Do you have counsel to explain your rights? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Mr. Walsh, present your case. Walsh stood, and for the next 30 minutes, he painted a picture of Reynolds Tech Solutions as a fraudulent operation. He presented the invoices from the shell companies, the documentation showing unpaid debts, testimonials from business partners who claimed I'd made false promises. It was all perfectly crafted, perfectly presented, perfectly damning. Your Honor, Walsh concluded, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Reynolds has been operating his business in bad faith, accumulating debts he cannot pay, and using investor funds inappropriately. The petitioning creditors are simply seeking to recover what they're owed through the orderly process of bankruptcy. Judge Thornton looked at Sarah. Miss Chen, response? Sarah stood, and I held my breath. Your Honor, we contend that these debts are fabricated. My client has never conducted business with any of the supposed creditors. These are shell companies, created specifically to manufacture grounds for this bankruptcy petition. That's a serious allegation, Judge Thornton said. Can you prove it? We have documentation showing that. Objection, Your Honor. Walsh stood. The respondent is attempting to distract from the central issue, which is whether legitimate debts exist. We've provided clear evidence that
They do. Whether Miss Chen's client remembers the transactions is irrelevant to whether they occurred. Your Honor, Sarah pressed on, if we could have access to the petitioner's business records, we could demonstrate. You can demonstrate whatever you like with your own records, Walsh interrupted, but you don't get to conduct a fishing expedition through our client's private information simply because you don't like the reality of your client's situation. Mr. Walsh, Judge Thornton said sharply, I'll decide what constitutes a fishing expedition in my courtroom. Miss Chen, do you have any concrete evidence that these debts are fraudulent? Sarah looked at me. I looked at our boxes of documents, all circumstantial, all suggestive, but nothing definitive, nothing that would blow the case open. We have inconsistencies in the documentation, Sarah said weakly. The timing of the invoices, the structure of the companies. Inconsistencies aren't evidence of fraud, Walsh said. They're evidence of sloppy record-keeping, which frankly seems consistent with how Mr. Reynolds has run his business. I felt my family's eyes on me. I glanced back and saw my father leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped, his expression unreadable. My mother sat perfectly still, her pearls catching the overhead lights. Marcus stared at his hands. Only Uncle Richard looked satisfied, like this was exactly how he'd scripted it. Judge Thornton reviewed the papers before her for a long moment. The courtroom was completely silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic outside. Finally, she looked up. Miss Chen, I'm sympathetic to your position, but sympathy doesn't override the law. The petitioners have presented documentation of debts. You've presented suspicions. Unless you can provide concrete evidence that these debts are fabricated, I'm inclined to. The courtroom doors opened.
A man in a dark suit entered, walking quickly down the aisle. He carried a briefcase and moved with purpose, heading straight for our table. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My name is Robert Harrison, and I'm counsel for Stratton Industries. We have information relevant to these proceedings."
The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Thornton banged her gavel once, sharp and loud. "Order! Mr. Harrison, you're not listed as counsel in this case. Explain your presence." Your Honor, Stratton Industries has been in contract negotiations with Reynolds Tech Solutions for the past 6 months. We were about to finalize a significant agreement when these bankruptcy proceedings became public. Given the nature of the allegations, we conducted our own investigation into Mr. Reynolds' company. Walsh stood immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The petitioners weren't notified of any third-party involvement." "And yet here we are," Judge Thornton cut him off. "Mr. Harrison, what is the nature of your information?" Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, Stratton Industries employs one of the most thorough due diligence teams in the country. When we investigate potential business partners, we don't just review their public information, we dig deep. And in reviewing Reynolds Tech Solutions, we discovered some troubling inconsistencies." He handed copies to the bailiff, who distributed them to Judge Thornton, Walsh, and Sarah. "What you're looking at," Harrison continued, "are the corporate filings for the 3 primary creditors in this bankruptcy petition: Titan Consulting Group, Northeast Business Solutions, and Summit Advisory Partners. Our team traced the ownership structure of these companies. They were all registered on the same day, October 12th of last year, by the same law firm, Morrison, Grant & Associates, which is—" "My firm," a voice said from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. Harold Morrison stood there, looking older and more tired than he had in our consultation. He walked down the aisle slowly, and I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. "Your Honor," Morrison said, "I need to make a statement regarding my involvement in this case." Judge Thornton leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Morrison, I'm aware that you initially consulted with Mr. Reynolds. Is there a conflict of interest we should know about?" "There's more than a conflict of interest, Your Honor. There's fraud." Morrison's voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind the words. "I was approached by Richard Reynolds, the defendant's uncle, 8 weeks ago. He asked me to create 3 shell companies and to backdate documentation, making it appear these companies had conducted business with Reynolds Tech Solutions. He offered me a substantial retainer to, in his words, create an airtight case for involuntary bankruptcy."
The courtroom exploded. My mother gasped. Marcus stood up, then sat back down. My father's face went from pale to red. Uncle Richard remained perfectly still, but his hands clenched the armrest of his seat. "Order!" Judge Thornton's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Morrison, you understand you're admitting to participating in fraud before this court?" "I am, Your Honor, and I'm prepared to face the consequences." Morrison pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "I have recordings of my conversations with Richard Reynolds. I have emails detailing the entire scheme. I have wire transfer records showing payments made to create this fraudulent case. And I have my own testimony admitting that I helped construct this elaborate lie." Judge Thornton's expression had gone from professional neutrality to something harder, colder. "Mr. Walsh, did you have knowledge of this?" Walsh shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Absolutely not, Your Honor. I was retained to represent what I believe to be legitimate creditors. If there's been fraud, my firm had no knowledge." "Your Honor," Harrison interrupted, "Stratton's investigation also revealed something else, something about Reynolds Tech Solutions that I think this court should know." He pulled out another document. 6 weeks ago, Reynolds Tech Solutions completed beta testing of their cloud security software. The results were extraordinary. Their encryption protocols are 2 generations ahead of anything currently on the market. The Department of Defense has been in preliminary discussions with them about potential applications for military cybersecurity. I stared at Harrison. We'd submitted our test results to the DoD, but it was supposed to be confidential. The meetings were exploratory, nothing concrete.
Additionally, 3 Fortune 100 companies have expressed serious interest in Reynolds' technology. The company isn't failing, Your Honor. It's on the verge of becoming a major player in cybersecurity, which raises the question, why would anyone want to destroy a company with this much potential? Judge Thornton turned to look at my family. Her gaze settled on my father, then Uncle Richard. "Mr. Richard Reynolds, stand up." Uncle Richard stood slowly. For the first time, he looked uncertain.
Are you an attorney licensed to practice in the state of New York? I am, Your Honor. Then you understand the severity of what's being alleged here. You understand that manufacturing evidence, creating shell companies to fabricate debts, and filing fraudulent bankruptcy petitions are not just civil matters. They are federal crimes. Your Honor, I'd like to consult with my own counsel before. You'll have plenty of time for that. Judge Thornton's voice was ice. Bailiff, I want the U.S. Marshals contacted immediately. Mr. Richard Reynolds is not to leave this courtroom. The whispers became a roar. My mother stood up, her composure finally cracking. Margaret, please, there must be some misunderstanding. Judge Thornton held up a hand. Mrs. Reynolds, sit down. This is my courtroom, and you will show proper respect. She turned to Morrison. Mr. Morrison, you've admitted to serious crimes, but you've also come forward voluntarily. I'm remanding you into federal custody, but I'll be recommending that prosecutors consider your cooperation when determining charges. 2 U.S. Marshals entered the courtroom. They must have been waiting nearby. Morrison held out his hands for cuffs without resistance. As he was led past our table, he stopped and looked at me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I knew it was wrong from the start, but the money... I have a daughter with medical bills, and He shook his head. That's no excuse. I hope you can build something good with your company, Mr. Reynolds. You deserve that chance. They led him away. As Judge Thornton turned her attention to Uncle Richard, who now looked smaller somehow, diminished. Your Honor, Uncle Richard said, his voice trying for its old authority and failing, I'd like to state for the record that I was acting in what I believe to be the family's best interests. The family's best interests? Judge Thornton's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Mr. Reynolds, you attempted to destroy your nephew's legitimate business through criminal fraud. You manufactured evidence, suborned perjury, and abused the legal system. And you did it to a company that... She paused, looking down at the documents Harrison had provided. Then she looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Reynolds Tech Solutions, RTS. I've seen that name before. She pulled out her phone, something I'd never seen a judge do in session, and typed something quickly. Her eyes widened. Your company developed the CipherGuard protocol, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice.
Judge Thornton set her phone down carefully. 2 months ago, my daughter, she's a cybersecurity analyst at Goldman Sachs, gave a presentation to her entire division about emerging technologies. She couldn't stop talking about CipherGuard. She said it was going to revolutionize how financial institutions handle data security. She said the company behind it, Reynolds Tech Solutions, was going to change the industry. The courtroom had gone completely silent. And your family, Judge Thornton continued, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, tried to destroy this. They tried to bankrupt you, ruin your reputation, and bury technology that could protect millions of people's financial data. Because of what? Pride? Control? She stood up from the bench. Everyone in the courtroom stood automatically. That's protocol when a judge stands. But Judge Thornton wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at me. She stepped down from the bench, which judges almost never do. She walked past the bailiff, past Walsh's table, past the gallery where my family sat in frozen shock.
She walked right up to me and extended her hand. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "on behalf of everyone who will benefit from your work, including my daughter and her colleagues, thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for fighting back against this injustice. And thank you for building something that matters." I took her hand in a daze. Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. I heard Marcus whisper something. I heard my father's voice, low and angry. "This is improper. This is completely improper." Judge Thornton held my hand for a moment longer, then returned to the bench. When she sat down, her professional mask was back in place, but something in her eyes had changed. "This court finds," she said, her voice formal and final, "that the involuntary bankruptcy petition against Reynolds Tech Solutions was filed in bad faith using fraudulent documentation. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into all parties involved in this fraud." She looked at my family. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, Marcus Reynolds, Claire Reynolds, while I cannot prove your direct involvement in the criminal conspiracy at this time, I am ordering you to make yourselves available for federal investigation. Failure to comply will result in material witness warrants." My father started to speak, but Judge Thornton cut him off. "I don't want to hear it. You sat in my courtroom and watched as your brother attempted to destroy your son. That may not be criminal, but it speaks to your character, or lack thereof." She turned to me one more time. "Mr. Reynolds, you're free to continue building your company. I suspect we'll be hearing great things about Reynolds Tech Solutions in the future. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down one final time.
The hallway outside the courtroom was chaos. Reporters who'd been covering other cases had gotten wind of the dramatic turn in ours and were swarming with cameras and microphones. U.S. Marshals were escorting Uncle Richard out in handcuffs, my mother crying behind them, my father's face a mask of rage and humiliation. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a side exit. "We need to get you out of here before— Daniel!" I turned. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his face flushed, his perfect hair finely disheveled. "Danny, wait, please!" Sarah positioned herself between us. "Mr. Reynolds, I don't think—" "It's okay," I said. "Give us a minute." She stepped back reluctantly, keeping a watchful eye. Marcus stopped a few feet away, and for the first time in years, I saw my brother truly vulnerable. His eyes were red, his hands shook slightly. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Danny, I didn't know Uncle Richard had fabricated evidence. Dad said you were ruining yourself, that we were helping you, that the debts were real." "Did you believe that?" I asked quietly. "Really? Did you actually think I'd run my company into the ground?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. "You knew something was wrong. Maybe you didn't know the specifics, but you knew Dad and Uncle Richard were manipulating things, and you went along with it because that's what you've always done, whatever keeps you in their good graces. That's not fair!"
Isn't it? I felt years of frustration rising. When have you ever stood up to Dad? When have you ever questioned anything he does? You delivered his bribe to my apartment, Marcus. You threatened me with SEC investigations. You were complicit. I'm your brother. Are you? The words came out harder than I intended. Because brothers support each other. Brothers believe in each other. What you did was choose Dad's approval over my life's work. Marcus flinched like I'd hit him. Behind him, I could see my parents being led away by their own lawyers, both of them refusing to look in my direction. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and his voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Danny. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it. Not today." I took a breath. "Maybe someday, but right now, I need distance from all of you. I need to rebuild my company, repair my reputation, and figure out who I am without the Reynolds family shadow hanging over me." "Danny." "Go home, Marcus. Take care of Mom and Dad through whatever's coming. That's where your loyalty is. But leave me out of it."
I walked away before he could respond. Sarah fell in step beside me, and we took the side exit into a cold January afternoon. I went straight to Mount Sinai Hospital. Kwame was sitting up in bed when I arrived, his laptop balanced on his knees, despite Amara's protests. "You're supposed to be resting," she was saying. "I'll rest when Daniel!" Kwame's face lit up. "What happened? I've been checking my phone every 5 minutes. Sarah sent a text saying it's handled, but..." I told them everything. The whole story spilled out. Morrison's confession, Harrison's revelations, Judge Thornton recognizing our company, the handshake, the complete dismissal of the case. By the end, both Kwame and Amara were crying. "I knew it," Kwame said, grabbing my hand. "I knew truth would win. I knew your family couldn't bury something real." "We almost lost," I said quietly. "If Morrison hadn't come forward, if Stratton hadn't investigated..." "But they did, and we didn't lose." Kwame squeezed my hand. "We're still here, brother. Reynolds Tech Solutions is still alive." Amara hugged me, and I let myself feel it all. The relief, the exhaustion, the grief of losing my family, the joy of saving my company. It all crashed over me at once, and I realized I was shaking. "What happens now?" Amara asked. "Now?" I wiped my eyes. "Now, we build. We finish CipherGuard. We sign real contracts. We prove that we were worth fighting for." 3 weeks later, I stood in front of 40 employees in our new office space in Chelsea. We'd signed the Stratton contract, $3 million. We'd gotten calls from 2 other Fortune 500 companies. And we'd hired the team we'd always needed. "I know the past few months have been terrifying," I told them. "I know some of you questioned whether this company would survive, whether your jobs were secure, whether any of this was worth it." I looked at Kwame, who was back at work, but under strict doctor's orders to manage his stress better. He grinned at me. "But we made it. Not because we were lucky, not because we had family money or powerful connections. We made it because we built something real, something that solves actual problems, something that matters." The room erupted in applause. After the meeting, I stood by the windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Sarah Chen approached, a folder in her hands. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, handing it over. Inside was a news article. "Federal prosecutors charge attorney with bankruptcy fraud. Reynolds family under investigation." There was Uncle Richard's mugshot, and below it, quotes from my father's attorney claiming they'd been deceived by Uncle Richard's actions, that they had no knowledge of any criminal activity. "They're trying to distance themselves," Sarah said. "Save whatever reputation they have left." Will it work? Legally, maybe. No one can prove they directly participated. But socially? She shrugged. The Reynolds name is mud in New York business circles right now. I've heard 3 different country clubs have asked your parents to resign their memberships. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I just felt sad. "Any word from them?" Sarah asked gently. "Your family?" I shook my head. Marcus sends texts sometimes, apologizing, asking if we can talk. I haven't responded yet. Will you? Eventually? I don't know. I looked out at the city. Millions of people, millions of stories. All of us just trying to build something meaningful with the time we had. Maybe someday, but right now, I have a different family to focus on. I gestured to the office behind us, where Kwame was showing new engineers our latest code, where our small team was building something revolutionary, where people believed in the vision I'd refused to abandon. "This is my family now," I said, "and I think that's okay." 6 months later, CipherGuard launched to massive industry acclaim. The tech press called it the biggest leap in data security in a decade. Reynolds Tech Solutions went from a struggling startup to a company valued at over $50 million.
We hired 75 more employees. We opened a second office in San Francisco. And one warm June evening, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. Hello? Daniel. It's Dad. I hadn't heard his voice since the courthouse. I stood up from my desk, walked to the window, and looked out at the sunset over Manhattan. What do you want? To apologize. His voice was different, quieter, less certain. Your mother and we've spent the last 6 months in therapy, trying to understand why we did what we did, trying to become better people. That's good, I said carefully. Uncle Richard pleaded guilty. He'll serve 3 years minimum. The lawyers say we won't face criminal charges, but the civil suits. He trailed off. We've lost a lot, Daniel. Not just money. Friends, respect, our place in society. Everything we spent our lives building. I didn't respond. I just listened to him breathe on the other end of the line. You tried to warn us. You tried to tell us that control wasn't the same as love, that destroying your dream wouldn't make us closer. We didn't listen. And now, another long pause. I'm proud of you, son. I should have said that years ago. I should have said it every day. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of what you've built. I'm proud of who you've become. And I'm sorry, so sorry, for trying to tear it all down. My throat felt tight. Why are you calling, Dad?
Because life is short. Because I'm 70 years old and I've spent too much of my life being wrong. Because you're my son, and I love you, and I don't want to die without you knowing that. I closed my eyes. Outside, the city lights were coming on. Millions of them. Each one representing someone's dream, someone's struggle, someone's hope. I need time, I finally said. I can't just forgive everything because you called and said the right words. I understand. But maybe, I continued slowly, maybe eventually we can talk. Really talk. Not about business or money or family legacy. Just talk. As people. I'd like that. His voice cracked. I'd like that very much. We said goodbye. I stood at the window for a long time afterward, phone in my hand, watching New York transition from day to night. Behind me, I heard Kwame's laugh from the conference room, heard our team celebrating another successful deployment, heard the sounds of something real, something built on truth and effort and people believing in each other. My family had tried to destroy me. They'd used every weapon at their disposal: money, influence, legal manipulation, emotional blackmail. They dragged me into a courtroom and tried to humiliate me in front of the world. But I'd stood my ground. I'd fought back. And in that moment, when Judge Thornton had stepped down from the bench and shaken my hand, when she'd acknowledged what we'd built and thanked me for not giving up, everything had changed. Not because I'd won some battle against my family, but because I'd finally proven to myself that I could stand alone, could build something meaningful, could survive without their approval or their support. That was the real victory. And it was just the beginning. 2 years after the courthouse drama, Reynolds Tech Solutions went public. Our IPO valued the company at $400 million. Kwame and I stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, watching our stock symbol light up the board, and I thought about how far we'd come. The night of the IPO, there was a celebration at a rooftop venue in Tribeca. 200 people, employees, investors, friends, industry colleagues, all there to celebrate what we'd built together.
I stood at the railing, looking out at the city, when someone approached. "Congratulations, Mr. Reynolds." I turned. Judge Margaret Thornton stood there in an elegant dress, holding a glass of champagne. "Judge Thornton," I said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." Your CFO invited me. I hope that's all right. More than all right. It's an honor. She stood beside me at the railing. My daughter still talks about CipherGuard. Her company just renewed their contract with you for another 3 years. We're grateful for the business. She's grateful for the protection. Judge Thornton smiled. You know, I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen thousands of cases, ruled on countless disputes, but I've never forgotten that day in my courtroom. The look on your face when I shook your hand. I'll never forget it either. Good. She turned to face me fully. Because that's the look of someone who refused to let injustice win, who stood up even when the odds were impossible. The world needs more people like that, Mr. Reynolds. More people who build real things and fight for what's right, even when it costs them everything. I almost lost, I admitted. If you hadn't recognized our company. But I did. And you didn't lose. That's what matters. She raised her glass. To building things that matter, and to never giving up. I clinked my glass against hers. To never giving up. She rejoined the party, and I stayed at the railing a moment longer. Somewhere in Connecticut, my family was living quieter lives. Marcus and I had coffee once a month now, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually look like brotherhood. My parents and I spoke on holidays, carefully, both sides trying to find a new normal. Uncle Richard was still in prison. He'd be there for another year. And me? I was here, in a city that had tried to break me, and instead made me stronger. Surrounded by people who'd chosen to believe in the vision, who'd stayed through the darkness because they knew we were building something real. My phone buzzed. A text from Kwame. Get back in here. They're about to do toasts, and you're the star of the show.
I smiled and headed back to the party, back to my team, back to the family I'd chosen, and the future we were building together. The Reynolds family had tried to destroy me in that courthouse. Instead, they'd set me free.